We're David and Sondra Price. Next month, we're going to be celebrating a milestone in our marriage, 50 years of marriage. This is a long time, but in the last 4 months have been very unusual in our history of marriage.
One of the fun new routines we've tried during this unusual time is to begin with season 1 of The Amazing Race and progress throughout. We have watched the change of styles, technology, and even the obstacles and challenges. But one observation is consistent. When a team recognizes their giftedness, their differing skills, their weaknesses and strengths, and operate together in harmony, they do well. They excel as a team. But when one becomes discouraged and argumentative and sarcastic and demeaning, the team loses steam and they don't do so well. Since it's always easier to observe the faults in someone else's relationship than our own, it has allowed Dave and me to have a platform to discuss some of the remaining difficulties we have in communication. And it's been a great building block for our marriage. So with 50 years of experience, we have lots of successes and failures and lots to bring to this next passage in 1 Peter. So let's begin.
All right, Peter in chapter 3, in verses 1 through 6, says, "In the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. Then, and even if some refuse to obey the good news, your godly lives will speak to them without any words. They will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. Don't be concerned about the outward beauty of fancy hairstyles, expensive jewelry, or beautiful clothes. You should clothe yourselves instead with the beauty that comes from within, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is so precious to God. This is how the holy women of old made themselves beautiful. They put their trust in God and accepted the authority of their husbands. For instance, Sarah obeyed her husband, Abraham, and called him her master. You are daughters when you do what is right without fear of what your husbands might do."
I have to admit, after almost 70 years of hearing and reading this passage, I still cringe when I hear it. And that's because I'm innately rebellious. My inner struggle is one of control. I want my own way, and I'm arrogant enough to think that my way is the best way. So these verses go against that inner struggle. I've also learned to actually fear men who rule over you, including my husband. I'm aware of what that can do. So I ask a few women at Wellspring what their fears are when they think about submission. And here's our consensus. Some of our fears are loss of power, that he won't make the right decisions, that he won't take the necessary steps to manage the family concerns, that he won't carry some of the duties and burden in the pressures of family life, that I won't get what I want, that I might be abused. We women are instinctively fearful of what men can do to our hearts and lives. So how do I wrestle with that command? I've learned to remember who I am, to ask what's at stake, to identify what I really want, and then learn to go after that. Who I am in marriage is easy. God brought Eve to Adam and said, "This is your Ezer Kenegdo." Ezer, two tough words, but let's try this explanation. Ezer is in the English Bible translated helper. Kenegdo indicates that the Ezer is man's match, literally as in front of him, as yin is to yang. I love how one theologian put it. Kenegdo suggests that what God created for Adam will correspond to him. Thus, the new creation will neither be superior nor inferior, but an equal. The creation of this helper will form one half of a polarity and will be to the man as the South Pole is to the North Pole. Quite a bit better than the anemic translation, "help me." That's a role I can embrace. But when I think about this meaning, I can't help but remember that dramatic scene from Lord of the Rings. And I just love it. When Eowyn is going to rescue Frodo, and she's chosen because of her great skills as a horsewoman. And she mounts this mighty black steed, and Frodo is over her perishing from poison, and she takes off with the black riders right on her tail. And in this, as a heroine flying through this dramatic scene with great risks, mortal danger, she reaches the safety of the river, makes sure Frodo is safe, and then unsheaths her sword and points at those black knights and says, "You can't get to him unless you get through me." And something in me says, I was made for that. I was made to be a lifesaver. Eowyn was saving Frodo's life. So what's exactly at stake in this submission? It's a matter of saving a life. My husband may be won to Jesus Christ if he's an unbeliever. That's an eternal proposition. Helping to snatch my husband from the jaws of our mortal enemy, Satan. But if he's a believer, how about this? She will be his strongest ally in pursuing God's purposes and his first roadblock when he veers off course. That I can be an ally in that pursuit, that speaks of a lifetime of adventure with eternal purpose also. Sometimes I need to just stop and consider for a moment, what did I mean when I said those vows 50 years ago? What was I looking for? I wanted Dave to use his power to protect me, to cherish me, to love me unconditionally. I wanted a relational team, to have an important role to play. So after the I-do's, how did you do? Not so great. It did not take long to recognize that the power I thought I'd captured for us was going to be diverted into his channels of a very strong work ethic, a love for the ministry and dedication, lots of study time. That was going to take his attention. So we each established our own kingdoms, our islands of responsibility, dug in our heels, and started building our kingdoms. Oh, we served together. There was seldom a angry voice raised in our home. I always felt safe with Dave. We did not have the skills to relationally work through our differences, nor did we acquire them. It was much more efficient to divide and conquer. We became a very efficient team to produce lots of good works for lots of years. When our kingdoms collided, I used my power to nag, remind, teach, preach. I used a lot of anger because anger covers over hurt. Dave's silence hurt me. I learned to recognize that my tone gave away the state of my heart. When I feel threatened, the anger gives me a sense of strength. It's automatic. I don't think about it. I use demeaning speech to let off steam. It's a means to control Dave also. The slight sarcasm, the superior tone makes me feel in control. The snarkiness gives me an edge. But it's like the poison dart in Frodo. It was slowly killing my husband. Those tones are relationship killers. I've made a lot of mistakes in that category. Some women use excesses in shopping, buying, decorating, crafting, exorbitant time and money in pursuit of their body image, their hair, their exercise. We all choose differently, but it's a smokescreen for a spirit that is not gentle or quiet or at rest. Each woman has her own set of control mechanisms because we think we can cover up our internal struggle through controlling our environment. Why not honestly assess yourself? Is life really so much better when you're in control? Is your control really covering that void and not being a life giver? Are you free inside? Do your kids live in an emotionally healthy environment? If your husband were to speak honestly, would he say you were a life giver, a life saver? Or would he say that you suck the life out of him by your demands? So how do I get what I really want? It's in these verses. Sarah in the Old Testament, not by the methods of her culture, nor the methods in our culture screaming at us from everywhere, but with a gentle and quiet spirit, is recorded for all time as a woman who submitted to a man who not once, but twice, risked her safety to save his neck. Sarah did not fear because she was trusting in God first. After we submit ourselves first to God and then under our husbands and relinquish control, our man senses something other than my demanding and controlling. He can hear the Holy Spirit speak. We are offering life to our husband. From a basis of quiet strength, I live out fully the calling of Ezer Kenegdo. This kind of gentle and quiet spirit does not define a non-contributing adult in our relationship. David needs my insights, my opinions. We're both imperfect. We need each other. The struggle to constructively disagree, to differ and come to agreeable solutions is tough. Proverbs calls it iron against iron, which means there will be sparks. Sometimes the most loving thing to do is to say the hard thing, but not from striving from a place of rest. Here is hope. These last 20 years have been unsurpassed in a growing knowledge and understanding of who we are and how we function together best. You might find that discouraging. What about the first 30? But what I know is I'm so glad we didn't divorce during the rough years. I would have still had to learn the same lessons, but without the benefit of an intact family, the longevity and knowledge from a lifetime together, the rich fruit of 50 years of loving commitment. We now have the love and the team that I dreamed of when I said I do, August 22nd, 1970. Marriage isn't like baking a cake, 40 minutes and it's done. We have seen magnificent temples on the race, and they took hundreds of years to be built and will be gone in a moment when Jesus returns. What God has helped us build will last forever because it's changed us. And we are eternal, and we both will share eternity in harmony that we can't even imagine at this point. My spirit calms down as I realize I don't have to fight for my way, my stuff. I lose the aggression, the edge that opposes gentleness. Isaiah 30:15, in quietness and trust is your strength. I want that strength. I want that beauty that will not fade. Do you?
To be brutally honest, I entered marriage with my head in the sand. I had no clue what it was to live like with a woman. What I observed from my parents and other relatives was that roles in marriage were defined by functions and by work. I didn't see relationship as a value. I was not prepared for the reality of a real relationship in marriage. Oh, I believe that God made man and woman, and He made them to rule and gave them a power. I did not know this meant that God wanted us to have His character and His heart and His power. I didn't realize that God put the desire to be powerful in our heart. I didn't internalize the fact that sin corrupted man's rule and his power and his authority. I also didn't internalize that man's aggressive or passive and silent behavior are due to the fact of our corrupted power and authority. That's why Sondra said, for me, I retreated. I wasn't going to let her control me. Morgan Snyder, in his book Becoming a King, writes, "The power entrusted to most men often brings harm. Often that power is used for self-promotion and personal gain. The mishandling of power always wounds the ones that we love the most, or we say we love. It's been God's plan to rescue man and to restore and transform their heart, including their relationships, and to give them His power. God gives hope for marriages." With this backdrop, I want to read today's passage for men. In verse 7 of chapter 3, Peter says, "In the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered." In this passage, I see 4 instructions that are regarding marriage, guidelines that will help transform a man's use of his power in his marriage relationship. When I read this verse, I immediately have a problem. What I learned growing up does not match this verse. First of all, it says, "in the same way." In the same way what? In the same way that Jesus Christ submitted His life, His heart, to the Father's plans. God is talking really about loving submission. Just like Jesus, I must submit myself first to God, which gets my heart in position to submit to others, including my wife. Paul's instruction to the Ephesian church is very helpful. In chapter 5, verse 25, he says, "Husbands, as well as submitting, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave Himself to her." Jesus first submitted Himself to God the Father. He yielded His personal wants or His rights to the Father's plan. He yielded His personal power to show love. The ultimate expression of His submission was sacrificing His life. Jesus set the pattern for submission, and He set the pattern for love. What we learn here is, husbands, first of all, submit your life to God. Then your heart is in a position to lovingly submit to your wife. Now, submission confronts my inner desire to control my own life, to do what I want, to have my own way. It's yielding. It's like a yield sign. Stop. Give right of way to those that have the right. This is a day-by-day, experience-by-experience choice in our lives. So how do husbands lovingly submit to and sacrificially love their wives? The second point here, I think, is you husbands must give honor to your wives. We honor our wife by acknowledging and respecting her value and her position. She's just not a sex partner, not just our chef or a maid. She is our life saver. Here's some ways that I've learned to honor Sondra. Not perfectly, not consistently, but one is listen to her and receive her advice. Let her know I receive her advice. Fulfill my promises. Don't bully her or raise my voice. Study her. Get to know her needs, her gifts, and encourage her. Notice and speak of her inner beauty. Don't compare her to other women. Your wife is your equal partner. Equal partner. We're a team. We're on the same team. Now, I am self-centered and proud and arrogant. It's difficult for me to honor others, including Sondra. But this brings back an example to me. Many years ago when we lived in Michigan, we were in a place to buy a house. So we narrowed it down to 2 homes. And one home we both kind of liked, and one the whole family liked. There was one that I preferred. So when we toured this house that I preferred, Sondra's socks became wet from a trickle in the basement. I inquired with the owner, and he said it was nothing. Sondra didn't want that house. We just didn't agree. So I remember going out at night, and I prayed. And what God brought to my mind was this verse. How can 2 walk together unless they agree? I interpreted it as, we don't agree, I make the decision. So we bought the house. Sondra submitted. On the day after the closing, we and our friends were tearing down some of the stuff in the basement and to do some renovation, and water began pouring down the basement wall. $9,000 later, the trickle problem was resolved. And it was a stepping stone in our marriage relationship. So not only do I honor her now more, but we treat her with understanding. And I take that to mean we delight in her. I'd like to take us back to the Garden of Eden again. Picture Adam and Eve. God has just created Adam, he's created Eve, and he brings Eve to her. I think they had exponential delight in each other. There was no shame, nothing to hide, nothing to prove, no fear. They totally understood each other. They totally delighted in each other. They understood each other. I think they worked and laughed and played together. There was harmony and honor and respect and submission to each other. They explored together. They had deep, long, respectful discussions together. Now, obviously, we don't experience this perfection today, but Jesus in our life can help us regain some of that delight, since we are partners together in God's new life. We have to be willing to accept God's grace and grapple through the messiness as His grace helps us. And these are daily choices we have to make in our marriage. Now here's the elephant in the room. A woman knows if her husband doesn't delight in her. She knows, or he doesn't. Now it's ironic that from a human perspective, I've been learning later in life to really delight in Sondra. I've learned that I delight in her in just a few ways. I choose to make her number one in my life. I choose to understand her. I choose to appreciate her and be grateful for her, for who she is, not what I wish she could be or what she can do. I choose to enjoy being with her, finding happiness in doing things and living life with her. Peter's not done. There is a warning here. He says, treat her as you should, so your prayers are not hindered. What? Does this really mean that God will not hear my prayers until I get it absolutely right with my wife? God does not expect perfection in our relationship, but I'm afraid we men do not take this warning seriously. This is serious. Here's what I think he means. A living and growing relationship with God will affect our relationship with others. Or, let's twist it the other way around. A living relationship with God depends on right relationships with other people, including our wife. Wow, that stings. This is in accord with what Jesus said. If you have a problem with a fellow believer, you must make it right with God first before coming to worship. So that means get things right with people. Get things right with your wife, or things are just not going to be right in your worship. So if a man is not considerate and respectful to his wife, his prayers will be hindered. If a man uses his position and his power to mistreat his wife, his relationship with God is hindered. Again, Christ makes the difference when we submit to Him and receive His transforming grace. His grace is sufficient. He changes us and forgives us. And sometimes God has to use a 2x4 in our head to get our attention. God did that in my life 20 years ago. He got my attention, and my transformation has been on a steady climb since then. So after 50 years of marriage, Sondra, I do love you more and I honor you more than I did 50 years ago.
And I can tell that, and I love you more.
Thank you.